For 10 years, that number glared from the top of the range's scoreboard like a dare. It belonged to the best, SEALs who had crawled through deserts, frozen in snowfields, and spent decades behind the glass of a scope. None of them could beat it. That morning, the air was heavy with the smell of gun oil and sun-baked sand. Spotters murmured wind calls. Brass casings clinked under boots. Every man on the line knew the record wasn't just a number, it was a legend. And then she walked out from behind the gear tent, calm, steady, carrying nothing but a data tablet in one hand and the quiet certainty that the next minute would change everything. You're watching the Storyscape, where quiet skill and impossible odds meet in the same breath. Here, it's not just about the shot, it's about the courage to take it. Tell me, where in the world are you watching from today? I read every single comment, and your answers might just inspire the next mission we tell. The Redwater training facility sat in the middle of a desert that seemed to stretch forever. On the horizon, heat shimmered above pale ridges, and the ground beneath the firing line was baked hard enough to crack. The air smelled of dust, oil, and the faint tang of spent gunpowder that clung to the range like it had soaked into its bones over decades of training. The range itself was a brutal test. Steel silhouettes and custom-shaped targets lined up at intervals across the flat expanse, the farthest sitting just under 2 miles out. Through the naked eye, that final plate was no bigger than a coin. Through a scope, it danced and shimmered in the mirage of rising heat. Hitting it wasn't just a matter of skill, it demanded an almost supernatural ability to read wind, temperature, and terrain. And to do it faster than anyone else, that bordered on impossible. For a decade, no one had touched the mark at the top of the scoreboard. A faded name, Cutter Briggs, and the time 0057.2 sat in sun-bleached paint at the very top. Briggs was a legend in his own right, a man whose reputation was part skill, part myth. His shot had been so precise, so fast, that even among the elite it had become a cautionary tale. Don't chase ghosts. Many had tried, none had come close. This morning was no different. SEALs lined the mats in rotation, rifles ready, spotters hunched over scopes. Voices carried low and steady as they called wind speeds and ranges. The occasional crack of a rifle cut through the dry air, followed by the dull ping of a hit, on the closer plates anyway. When the shots reached out past a mile, the pings stopped.
A small group of visiting Marines stood near the observation area, arms crossed, watching. They had come to see if anyone would even dare to take the full record run today. Most weren't holding their breath. The farthest target sat untouched under the desert sun, and the scoreboard's top line remained unmoved. At the edge of the range, near the gear tent, Captain Morgan Hale sat cross-legged on a folding chair. She wore an olive range vest over a plain shirt, her hair pulled back into a neat regulation bun. In her lap rested a data tablet, the screen glowing with charts and numbers. Every so often she tapped the screen, scrolling through ballistic profiles. To anyone passing by, she looked like a tech support officer, someone there to log hits and misses, maybe calibrate equipment. She wasn't in the shooting order. She wasn't even armed. But Lieutenant Harrow, the officer in charge of the range today, knew better. Her name was buried in files most people at Redwater didn't have clearance to read. Harrow had seen it once, pure accident, a slip in digital security that let him catch a glimpse of a classified mission summary. He hadn't read the details, but he remembered the commendation that followed. For exceptional precision and unwavering composure under operational fire, the kind of line you didn't just hand out. The rest of the range had no idea. To them, she was just another support tech, and she seemed fine with that. A call went up from the firing line. Another shooter had just run the full course. His shots were clean and fast until the last plate. 2 rounds missed high, and the timer stopped with a buzz. The crowd's murmur was almost sympathetic. The shooter cursed under his breath, cleared his rifle, and stepped off the line. "Still Briggs," someone muttered from the Marines group. Harrow's eyes slid to Morgan. She was watching the line now, not her tablet. He walked over. "You ever shoot this course?" Her gaze didn't waver. "Not here." "Anywhere like it?" A pause. "Somewhere harder." He tilted his head toward the empty mat. "It's open." A couple of SEALs nearby caught the exchange. One smirked. "What's this? Logistics is going to take a crack at Briggs? Someone get the camera." Laughter rolled through the group, low and dismissive. Morgan didn't even blink. She stood, set her tablet aside, and stepped onto the firing line. "Got a spotter?" Harrow nodded toward Sergeant Cole, one of the best on the base. "He's yours." Cole didn't question it. Something in her stance as she settled prone on the mat made him adjust his scope without a word. He'd spotted for plenty of shooters, but this was different. The way she placed the MK-13 on its bipod, the way her cheek met the stock, the precise set of her hands, it was all muscle memory, honed and deliberate. "Wind, left, 2 knots. Target 1, in your glass?" "In my glass," she said, voice steady. The laughter faded behind them. The range seemed to lean in, listening. She flicked the safety off with a soft click, exhaled once, and waited. Somewhere out past a mile, the last untouched plate gleamed in the sun. The range fell into an unnatural stillness. Even the faint rustle of wind over the desert seemed to wait. Cole's voice was calm, almost surgical, as he called it out. "Target 1, 500 yards. Send it." Captain Morgan Hale's finger found the trigger, pressure smooth and deliberate. The rifle barked, the sound cracking across the line. Through the spotting scope, Cole watched the first plate spin, the impact so clean it might have been rehearsed. Hit. Adjust 3 clicks right for 2, 800 yards. The bolt slid back, casing ejected with a sharp metallic note. She fed the next round, settled again. No wasted movement, no hesitation. The second shot rang out. Another hit, the plate swinging like a pendulum. By the third target, 2 operators had stepped closer, eyes narrowing. They were used to seeing clean shots. They weren't used to seeing them come this fast without a single correction or second guess. Target 4, 1,000 yards. Mirage heavy, watch your aim. Morgan didn't need the warning. The crosshairs moved with a precision that came from instinct as much as calculation. The 4th target fell. Cole risked a glance at the timer. She was moving at a pace that should have been impossible without a miss. 5th plate, mile marker, Cole breathed. The air past that distance played tricks with the eyes. Heat distortion turned targets into dancing ghosts. Most shooters needed an extra breath, a small correction. Morgan gave it 1 steady inhale, 1 exhale, and the rifle spoke again. Ping. The spotter didn't hide his grin. Now it was just the last plate, Briggs's plate. The one that everyone whispered about. The one that sat in the desert like a king that had ruled for a decade. 2 miles. Winds up to 3 knots. You've got a 6-inch drift at this range. Cole's voice had dropped to a near whisper. Morgan closed her eyes for a heartbeat. In that moment, the range disappeared. The laughter from before, the heat, even the weight of the rifle. All that existed was the line from her scope to that tiny circle of steel in the haze. The shot broke like a quiet promise. A second of silence. 2. 3. And then, ping. Cole's breath came out in a rush. The timer froze. 0054
.6. 3 seconds faster than the ghost at the top of the board. Nobody cheered right away. The sound of the hit was still sinking in. Then, like a wave, the line erupted. Shouts, low whistles, disbelief. Someone muttered, "No way." Another said, That's a new record." Morgan pushed herself up, cleared the chamber, and handed the rifle back without ceremony. Cole was still staring at the scoreboard as the number changed, and her name slid into first place above Briggs.
Harrow was halfway to her when the sharp crackle of a radio cut through the noise. "Overwatch, this is Falcon. We've got movement on Ridge 6. Possible long-range hostile, 2 clicks from your position. Need eyes and scope up there now." Harrow didn't even look around. "You heard that?" She was already picking up the rifle again. "Lead the way." The cheer never quite formed. It was more like a pressure wave that rolled to the edges of the firing line and broke apart when the radio cut in. What started as a handful of low whistles and muttered disbelief flattened under a clipped voice that carried across the sun-baked air with the authority of a countdown. "Ridge 6, confirmed Overwatch. Possible hostile with line of sight on Route Alpha. 5 vehicles inbound within minutes. We need eyes, we need glass." The scoreboard behind them still flashed the new number, but no one was looking at it anymore. Every gaze pivoted toward the jagged rise of Ridge 6, a serrated spine that threw long black teeth across the desert floor. Harrow didn't waste syllables. He didn't gather a huddle, didn't consult a playbook. He turned, already walking, and the way he looked at Captain Morgan Hale said everything the radio hadn't. "You've got the rhythm," he said, not bothering to dress it up as an order, "and we've got the clock." Morgan picked the rifle up like it belonged there, slung the strap, and nodded to Cole. The spotter had his pack on before she finished nodding. They didn't run. Running wastes breath and scatters thoughts. They moved, efficiently, purpose in every step, off the compacted range dirt and into the ankle-rolling chaos where the training facility ended and the country that never cared about scoreboards began. The air changed with the terrain. On the line it tasted like oil, hot metal, and old brass. On the slope it turned to stone dust and sun. Heat came from above and below, reflecting off pale rock, turning the climb into a slow conversation with gravity. They spoke softly as they went. Not chatter, not tension relief, just the kind of sparse, utilitarian language that keeps 2 minds aligned under a single objective. "Dead ground at 60. We crest left, shatterline by the shale, less skyline." Morgan answered with the smallest tilt of her chin and shifted her path a meter left without breaking cadence.
Halfway up, the ground steepened, and the pebbled surface turned treacherous. Loose shale rolling like ball bearings under their boots. Morgan dropped to a low crouch and then to a crawl, forearms and knees finding the ledger lines of rock that wouldn't slide. Cole eased past her to glass the upper shelves, breathing steady, body language still. He talked more to the scope than to her. "Mirage is thick but stable. Wind's a light quarter. There. Possible silhouette under that burned juniper, upper third of the ridge. Bipod legs. The angle's good for Route Alpha. He's patient." A long blink from her acknowledged the picture. She let her pulse downshift another gear, felt the metronome behind her sternum slow until it matched the deliberate climb of seconds toward the convoy's approach. They used the terrain the way a good pilot uses clouds and sun, slicing from shadow to shadow, letting the ridge's own bones hide them. The radio came alive again, background noise only, a distant control net counting vehicles, spacing, checkpoints. Morgan let it blur into something like distant surf and kept her attention on the math that mattered here. Distance against elevation, wind against mirage, the discipline of position against the temptation to rush. Speed was currency, but only if you could spend it without debt. She flattened behind a fin of rock, slid the rifle forward until the bipod's feet found purchase with that honest little scrape of metal on stone, and only then allowed herself a long, uncluttered breath. From the ledge, the world looked like a tactical diagram come to life. The road lay a thin gray thread far below, heat rippling across it, so that the convoy's lead vehicle seemed to waver between frames. The burned juniper stood like a pointing finger at 11 o'clock, and just left of it, tucked into a pocket of shade, lay the shape that didn't belong to rock or scrub. Even at this distance, there were tells. The disciplined line of a barrel too straight to be branch, the careful stillness of posture that wasn't laziness, but intent. She didn't think about who he was or why he had chosen this spot. The motive was irrelevant. The geometry mattered. The clock mattered.
Cole settled the scope and let his voice fall into that neutral hum that keeps hands from hurrying. 1900 and change. Quartering right, call it 2 knots steady. We've got light boil on the flats, heavier shimmer over the road. Convoy is 3 minutes to his lane. Morgan let the facts thread into her, not stopping at the brain but dropping into the body until they were simply part of her posture. The stock met her cheek at the exact angle that left no ambiguity in the sight picture. Her rear elbow found the rock like it had always been meant for that patch of stone. In the glass, the reticle drifted, then steadied, then became a thing that didn't need willing because the preparation had already done the willing for her. She could have taken the shot then. The wind was reading honest, the mirage predictable, the target stable. But the road told a story the ridge couldn't. Hot air dancing harder just beyond the kill zone, a shimmer that would bend light and mind if you let it. She shifted her hold a breath's width, not enough to change the picture, just enough to remind her hands that patience is a tactic. The urge to prove you are fast is the trap the fast fall into. Let the target confirm itself. Let the road confess its heat. Let the air say what it intends to do. 2 minutes. Across the valley, the convoy grew from suggestion to shape. A bright wink on glass, then another. Cole's voice thinned further, the way sound does when you're trying not to crowd someone at the edge of a decision. He's keyed on the lead truck. His muzzle set for the first clear stretch after Marcus 7. He'll wait. He wants a moving shot to flex. Pride makes timing predictable. It wasn't disdain, just pattern recognition. Morgan let the thought pass across her like shade and then be gone. Pride in others was a tool. Pride in yourself was a leak. 1 minute. She let another breath dissolve from the bottom of her lungs and watched the reticle separate itself from her heartbeat entirely. In the space where nerves often try to speak, there was simply the clean, workmanlike checklist that had made the scoreboard irrelevant 5 minutes ago. Elevation dialed, hold confirmed, shoulder pressure true, jaw loose, finger in porting pressure, never pushing, just arriving. Somewhere far below, a driver checked a mirror and adjusted a wheel a 1/4 inch. Somewhere above, a bird crossed the thin slice of blue sky and left no mark. The world was indifferent to records and to threats. That was fine. She wasn't here for the world. She was here for the lane. 30 seconds.
The hostile shifted. Not much, not dramatic. Just that small, lethal tightening that happens when intention turns into movement. The crosshairs touched the place where anatomy becomes mechanics, and waited there as if nothing in the universe could imagine any other place to be. She didn't count. She didn't talk. The shot wasn't a decision anymore. It was the natural end of a line that had begun the moment Captain Morgan Hale's boot left the range dirt. The rifle answered her like an agreement. The report stepped into the air and was instantly carried thin along the rock. On the far shelf, the shape under the juniper rolled in a single, unarguing motion. His bipod splayed and skittered, his barrel tipped to the wrong horizon. Cole didn't say hit, because confirmation is for targets that might lie. Instead, he swept the glass across the shells, up through the sparse scrub, over the secondary perches. No second shooter, he said, calm as before, lane clear. Down on the flats, the convoy never wavered. If anyone looked up, the glare hid the truth well enough. The only acknowledgement came back through the radio in a tone stripped of celebration and built for forward motion. Overwatch, Ridge 6 green. Route Alpha maintains speed. Acknowledge. Cole answered for both of them with a simple copy, and took his eyes off the glass only long enough to share that small, private smile two professionals exchange when the job and the prep fit each other like threads. Silence returned to the rock, not the stagey kind that begs to be admired, but the practical absence of sound that lets you hear the rest of the picture. Morgan stayed on the scope longer than necessary, not out of doubt, but because good habits are made in the moments when you could justify relaxing and choose not to. When she finally came off the rifle, she didn't commemorate anything. She broke position cleanly, folded the bipod, stowed the sling so it wouldn't snag on the descent. Cole already had to pack up. The descent would be faster, but haste had a way of turning ankles into liabilities and stone cuts into long, annoying stories. They moved the way they'd come, deliberate, economical, eyes pulling in the terrain before the boots touched it. Halfway down, the wind shifted to their faces and thinned the heat enough to taste the mineral in the dust. The radio crackled again, background net, range control reasserting normal, someone laughing about coffee going cold when the board changed. Morgan let it wash past. The scoreboard mattered for exactly as long as it took to put a name at the top. Out here, no paint recorded what you did, and no one cared about seconds saved if you missed the 1 second that counted. She preferred it this way. The ridge had no bias. The ridge allowed you to be as good as you claimed without mingling the claim with applause.
At the base, the boundary between country and facility felt almost ceremonial, a line in the dirt where order picked up the threads that chaos left loose. Harrow was waiting because, of course he was. Men who run good ranges don't leave outcomes to rumor. His eyes flicked once to the rifle, once to Morgan's face, once to Cole. He didn't ask if it was done. Cole didn't offer color. Lane clear, he said the way someone might say door closed or light off. Harrow nodded once, a simple tick of acknowledgement that carried the weight of more ornate praise while avoiding the waste of it. There was no ring of admirers, no immediate ceremony at the board. A few of the SEALs who had smirked on the line earlier found other places to put their eyes and hands, suddenly very busy with straps and bolts that probably didn't need adjusting. The visiting Marines watched her the way professionals watch weather, aware that forecasts had just been rewritten. One of them started to say something, thought better of it, and settled on a respectful incline of the head. It was enough. Morgan returned it with a fractional nod and set the rifle down on the stand with the same care she would have used for a tool she expected to need again in an hour. Cole, ever the pragmatist, pulled a canteen from his pack and offered it. She took a sip, let the water sit on her tongue, then swallowed and felt the desert recede the smallest degree. "You could have taken the shot 30 seconds earlier," he said, not as critique, but as an invitation. She capped the canteen and handed it back. "I could have, but the air hadn't told the truth yet." He huffed a quiet laugh at that, because it sounded like mysticism, but it wasn't. Patience, in this line of work, is just data with better manners. The radio found them one more time, not urgent now, more like the tap on a door that says there's another visitor waiting. "Overwatch, standby for a new tasking, unrelated to Route Alpha. Possible movement on Ridge 4, request confirm." Harrow lifted his chin in Morgan's direction. He didn't have to frame it as a question. She picked up the rifle again, but not with the weight of obligation, more like a craftsman reaching for a familiar instrument after the audience has left and the real work begins.
On the way past the board, Morgan didn't look up. The number on top would be there later, and later still it would peel and fade like all the others. Records were for buildings. The ridge kept different books. Cole fell into step beside her, not because of duty, but because this was the shape their competence made when it moved. Shooter, spotter, a single tool with two minds. The range noise dissolved behind them until it was as thin as mirage, and the spine of Ridge 4 rose in front of them like the next line on a map someone had drawn not with ink, but with need. They didn't talk strategy as they crossed the open, because the strategy was implied in the way they breathed and placed their feet. They didn't rehearse lines for anyone up top,
because no one up top would hear them. Morgan thought, briefly and without attachment, of the woman back at the board, the version of herself some of them would keep in their heads as the one who broke a ghost. It was fine that they had that version. It would sell the next story to the skeptical and make the next order easier to give. But the heart of the thing wasn't there. It was here, in the elastic silence between call and answer, in the long geometry from glass to target, in the discipline sturdy enough to be quiet right up until the exact moment it wasn't. At the foot of Ridge 4, she paused just long enough to feel the ground under her palms, the texture of it, the honest roughness that would be her platform. Cole went prone and began to glass, and the horizon rearranged itself into problems worth solving. The day hadn't cooled, and the sun hadn't moved much, but something in the tempo had changed anyway. The first task demanded proof. The next would require momentum. Morgan set the rifle down, let her body lengthen to match the earth, and for the second time that morning allowed the rest of the world to shrink until all that remained was the lane, the air, the shot, and the quiet that follows when courage shows up exactly where it's needed and nowhere else. The climb to Ridge 4 was shorter than 6, but steeper. Its jagged edges looked like they'd been carved by a hand that didn't care for symmetry or mercy. Loose rock skittered under their boots as Captain Morgan Hale and Cole worked their way upward, using each shadow as a stepping stone. Cole led, scanning every break in the ridgeline through his glass, the muscles in his jaw tight, but his movements deliberate.
Halfway up, he crouched, one knee braced against the slope. Movement, he murmured, angling the scope. 2 figures, maybe 3, work in the upper shelf. They're not set up yet, but they've got gear. His tone was different this time, less certain, more calculating. Could be spotters. Could be trying to find their lane before the convoy circles back. Morgan joined him on the crouch, resting the rifle across her knees while her eyes searched the ridge above. Even without magnification, she could pick out the flash of sun on glass, binoculars or a scope, either one a problem. How far? 1,800, Cole replied, adjusting the focus. Wind's cleaner here, 1 knot from the west, but the lights cutting hard across their position makes them harder to read. Morgan nodded once and motioned to move. They crept higher, the slope narrowing into a channel of rock. The temperature dropped slightly in the shade, but the air felt heavier, each breath thick with dust. The channel spat them out onto a ledge just below the crest, giving them a shallow angle on the upper shelf. From here, she could see the figures clearly. 2 crouched low, another prone beside a pack that could just as easily hold a rifle as a radio. Cole lay flat, extending the bipod on his spotting scope. Scanning the valley. If they find the convoy's return path, we're in for trouble. Morgan slid the MK-13 into place beside him, the cool metal steady against her cheek as she looked through the scope. The crosshairs caught the first crouched figure, tracking the subtle shift of shoulders as he scanned. He was searching, not expecting to be found. They're setting up, Cole said quietly. The prone one just pulled out a rifle. Morgan adjusted her hold, making micro-corrections for elevation. Which one's the shooter? Middle, dark jacket, his buddies feeding him ranges. They're working quick now. The moment sharpened into focus. This wasn't a record attempt, and it wasn't training. This was the window before a threat became a certainty. Morgan settled the reticle on the prone figure, waited for the wind to steady, then eased into the trigger. The crock of the rifle echoed off the ridge. Through her scope, the prone figure jerked back, his rifle tumbling sideways. The 2 crouched figures froze, then scrambled for cover, but Cole was already calling corrections for her second shot. Left one's moving uphill, range 1650, slight rise. She swung the reticle, caught the runner mid-stride, and sent another round. The figure stumbled into the rock face and slid from view. The third disappeared over the crest. Cole kept scanning. Last one's gone, probably breaking contact. Good, Morgan said, pulling back from the rifle. We've made our point. The radio crackled in Harrow's voice. Overwatch status? Ridge 4 secure. Threat neutralized, Cole answered.
They stayed prone for another minute, glassing the shelf for movement. Nothing. The ridge was quiet again, its jagged crown silhouetted against the high sun. Morgan folded the bipod, slung the rifle, and together they began the descent. About halfway down, Cole glanced over his shoulder. You realize you just cleared 2 ridges before noon, right? Morgan gave a faint smile. Let's hope they don't name a third before lunch. They stepped back onto level ground, the range in the distance and the ridges behind them, silent, still, and holding their secrets. The scoreboard would still have her name on top, but she knew the real record had been set out here, twice, in places where no one was keeping time. They were 50 yards from the perimeter rope when the first dull thump rolled across the flats. It wasn't rifle fire, it was deeper, a fist in the air that paused conversation and turned heads without needing translation. Cole's eyes cut to the horizon. A heartbeat later, a puff of brown dust bloomed 100 meters short of the range road and drifted away like a shrug. Spotting round, he said, already bringing the scope up. The second thump landed closer, walked in like a man testing steps on a dark staircase. This one threw grit across the white line that marked the far lanes. Harrow's radio came before the third, a controlled voice pressed flat to keep the edges from fraying. Overwatch, be advised, possible indirect fire from the east. Medical tent and fuel truck are exposed. I need highs, now. They didn't need to ask permission. Captain Morgan Hale pivoted with Cole and sprinted for the nearest high ground inside the perimeter, a squat maintenance tower with a ladder up its spine and a roof just tall enough to see over the low scrub. Cole was up first, then reached to haul the rifle bag while Morgan moved hand over hand behind him. The tower shivered under the next thump. A new dust fan flared, closer again, the math of it marching towards soft targets. From the roof, the desert reassembled itself in clean lines. Cold glassed east, sweeping slow, then stopped. Got a glint. 2, maybe 3 figures behind a low berm, working a small tube. It looks improvised, but they only need close. He started calling ranges. 2,000 out. Wind is negligible down low, but hot air is dancing above the flats. They're bracketing left to right. Morgan laid the MK-13 across the roof lip, bipod biting into paint. Priorities? First, the one with the sight. He's the brain. Then the loader. If they scatter, we bought time for the cordon to harden. Another thump. The dust jumped again, now between the fuel truck and the tool shed. Range control yelled something below, and people moved with that purposeful speed that isn't panic, but is very close to it.
Morgan settled on the glint. Small mirror, hand angle, a head turning to confirm. The man with the sight was steady, answering to his own inner metronome, shifting the tiny circle of light across a grid only he could see. The reticle drew down on his center line and paused. Cole murmured a number. She barely heard it. She could feel the air sitting honest, could feel the mirage in the narrow ribbon above the dirt, the tiny push it would put on a long shot at belly height. She exhaled and let the trigger become a gate rather than a task. The crack from the roof rolled outward. In the glass, the mirror vanished from view as the spotter folded in on himself and went down behind the berm. The loader flinched, hands flattening as instinct overruled training. A third figure dove away, small and fast, and suddenly very interested in other ground. Sight down, Cole said. Loader's frozen, tubes unmanned. Then keep them that way. The second shot came quicker, not rushed but unburdened by the deep assessment the first required. The loader's hands jerked off the tube, and he tumbled sideways, scrambling on all fours before committing to a full retreat. The third man popped up just long enough to drag the tube, then thought better of it and ran empty-handed into the brush. Cole tracked him only long enough to confirm he wasn't circling back. Below, range hands were already dragging canvas and folding tables clear of the fuel truck, moving in straight lines that kept bodies far from angles. Harrow's voice returned on the net. "Overwatch, talk to me." "Indirect neutralized. Crew broke contact. Area east looks clear for now." "Copy. Hold the tower. If they were probing, I want your glass on the rest of the clock." Morgan stayed on the rifle but let her eyes do what good glass never can. Edge checks, roofline scans, the small movements humans make when they think they're background. Nothing else moved. The range's noise inched back up from taut to functional. Shouted counts, the scrape of skids, the familiar clang of steel being unhooked and set safe. Cole finally let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "Third ridge without leaving the wire," he said, almost a joke. Morgan didn't smile, but the corner of her mouth softened. "Ridge is a shape. Sometimes it's on the map. Sometimes it's a line you draw where you have to stand." They stayed on the tower until the light shifted and the air lost its hard edges. Harrow joined them by ladder rather than radio, climbing without hurry until his head met the roofline. He looked out first, then at the rifle, then at Morgan. "Two ridges and a tower," he said, not making it a question. "You keep collecting quiet work." "Quiet is the point," Morgan answered.
He nodded to the east. "We'll sweep it before dusk. Patrol's already lacing the approach with sensors. I'm moving the med tent under hard cover." He glanced at the range beyond the perimeter, where the scoreboard still held its bright red truth. "That number's gonna spin a story. Fine, let it. But men who got to keep their stories today won't be talking about the paint." Morgan slid the bolt back, checked an empty chamber, clicked it forward again, and eased the safety on. "Then we did it right." They climbed down, boots ringing the ladder's rungs. On the ground, the tower looked smaller than it had felt from the roof, just a square of welded metal grown old in the sun. Cole tapped its leg with a knuckle. "Not much of a perch," he said. It was enough. They crossed the yard toward the gear table. Voices trailed them in low threads, respectful, curious, intentionally casual, men revising mental maps without admitting they'd drawn the old ones wrong. A Marine who'd watched the board that morning met Morgan's eyes and gave the barest nod. Nothing performative, the kind of acknowledgement professionals exchange when the conversation is bigger than either of them and needs neither one to raise their voice. At the table, Morgan broke the rifle down the way she always did, piece by piece, motion by motion, the ritual that says skill comes from repetition and not from applause. Cole logged rounds in the Times, quick pen strokes that would become boring numbers in a binder nobody outside the wire would ever read. Harrow passed by with a list in his hand and a new tasking forming behind his eyes. He paused a fraction. "We're running a convoy drill at last light. Real vehicles, real spacing. I want a silent Overwatch and a clean road." Morgan didn't ask for details. "How long?" 30 minutes from staging to wheels up. Ridge 3 will do." He started to walk, then stopped himself, the way someone does when they realize they've left out the only part of speech that matters. He met her eyes. "Good work." "Good orders," Morgan said. As the sun tilted, heat bled off the rock and left the desert smelling like dust and iron again. The scoreboard's paint cooled. The crews rolled cables and stacked stands. Somewhere beyond the wire, 3 men were deciding whether today had been a warning or an ending. Here, inside it, the range recalibrated to now. Morgan slung the rifle, felt its familiar weight settle in, and let the day compress into a simple shape. A number on a board that didn't matter anymore. A road that would be safe because it had to be. And a ridgeline waiting to be turned from a problem into a story that nobody would need to embellish.
Cole fell in beside her, reading her pace and matching it without thinking. Last light, he said, as if it were both a time and a destination. Morgan nodded once. We'll meet it on higher ground. The convoy rolled out in staggered formation, engines low, lights off. Dust rose in slow curtains behind the lead truck, curling in the golden haze of the setting sun. From the roof of Ridge 3's observation post, Captain Morgan Hale scanned each vehicle in turn, counting more than just numbers. She read spacing, speed, and the silent discipline of drivers who knew the drill wasn't for show. Cole sat beside her, glassing on the far perimeter. Traffic's Kunin to the west, he reported. If anything's moving out there, it's keeping its head down. Morgan adjusted her scope, tracing the ridgeline that cut the desert into shadow and light. The air was cooler now, the long heat bleeding away, but the terrain still held every story it had been given. To the east, she caught the faintest shimmer, a mirage, nothing more, but she logged it anyway. The habit wasn't paranoia, it was craft. Below, the second truck in the column eased slightly right to give a straggler room to rejoin. No horn, no signal, just the language of convoy work. Morgan felt a flicker of quiet satisfaction. These were the kinds of days that never made headlines, but kept people alive all the same. The radio cracked softly in her ear. Harrow's voice. Overwatch sitrep. Convoy intact, spacing steady, approach lanes clear. We're eyes on until the last axle clears the hardtop. Copy. Bring it home. Cole shifted to cover the rear, his scope following the tail vehicle as it climbed a low grade. The sun had dropped far enough down that the ridge shadows reached across the road, long fingers pulling the daylight back into the earth. Morgan tracked the lead truck through the last turn. Lead's at the gate, she said. 2 minutes and we're all in. They stayed on glass until the final vehicle rolled past the wire. Only then did Morgan lower her rifle, the motion unhurried, methodical. She locked the bolt open, cleared the chamber, and laid the MK-13 in its case. Harrow met them halfway down the ridge, boots crunching in the loose gravel. He didn't ask for a debrief. He'd been listening the whole time. Instead, he looked past them at the empty road and gave a short nod. Clean run. That's the kind I like. Morgan returned the nod. It's the kind we work for. The three of them walked back toward the compound in companionable silence. The scoreboard still stood where it had that morning, the red number unchanged, but the day had shifted around it. Out here, paint and paper were the least reliable storytellers. As they neared the perimeter lights, Cole glanced at her. So, 2 ridges, a tower, and a convoy. You going for a full set?
Morgan's mouth curved just enough to be noticed. I'm going for whatever's next. Inside the wire, the night crew was already taking over, the range settling into its after-hours rhythm. Gear checks, low voices, the clink of tools and canvas rolls. Morgan slung a rifle and felt the familiar weight as part of herself. Today had been about precision, not noise, about work done right so that tomorrow would even be possible. Somewhere beyond the desert's edge, 3 men were still running, and maybe they'd think twice before setting up a tube again. If they didn't, Morgan Hale would be waiting, on whatever ridge the day required. Last light had passed, but for Captain Morgan Hale, the high ground was never about the sun. It was about seeing first, deciding fast, and leaving nothing on the board except the quiet proof that the job had been done.